Hey guys, welcome back to Boy73, the small engine doctor. Today in this video series, I'm going to show you how to build a welding cart like this. And here's the MIG welder, and this is the stick welder I'll be making the rack for. Now since you've already seen the final product in the introduction of this video, I'm going to get right into the building of the cart. So what I'm using today is some 2x2 square tubing. And as you can see, I've already got the base kind of put together like this. I haven't welded it yet. I'm going to give you the measurements of the actual pieces of metal here. And the walls of the square tubing is fairly thick. You don't have to go this thick. It might be a bit overkill, but that's the metal I could get my hands on easily. So the measurements for the base is 28 inches for the long pieces and 17 inches for the more narrow pieces. Now I got these cut by Get Bent Metal at his shop with a metal bandsaw. He just basically cut it at 45-degree angles for me. So what I've started doing is making a small bevel all around the edges of the square tubing. And for that I'm using a flat disc on my angle grinder. It works great. So I've done 3 corners. I'm going to finish this corner here and just show you guys how I'm doing it. And always wear safety glasses when using equipment like this. So as you can see up close here, I'm making a nice beveled edge. This will allow the weld to get in between both pieces and penetrate. And then if I grind it down, it's going to be nice and flush. At the end here, I'm just going to grind it down flat with the other piece. So I'm going to put both pieces together like this and then just go down a bit. So now I've got all the pieces beveled and adjusted and all that. What I'm going to do now is put them together, make sure that everything is square, then I'm going to tack it up with my MIG welder. I'll try these miter clamps here to see if it holds it nice and straight, and I've also got a magnet here that I'm going to try in one corner. I want to make sure it's a true 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to use this small square here and see how square the corners are. And this one looks pretty good. And now it's a matter of repeating the process on all the other 3 corners. Try to get it as square as you can before you even tack weld the metal together. Now what I'm going to do is measure my corners from end to end like that to make sure that they're even. And I've got 32 inches and 3/4. Now I'm going to measure the other side. And again, I've got 32 and 3/4. That's excellent. If you don't have the same measurements from side to side like I just did, you're going to have to readjust all the metal to make sure you've got the same width on each end. And today I'll be welding this project with my Lincoln Power MIG 180C MIG welder. And I have the argon CO2 gas tank, and I tied it to my workbench to make sure it doesn't fall off anywhere. And I'm using an 025 solid wire to do this job today. So at this point, I'm ready to start tacking the square tubing together. So I'm going to open up the fuel tank. Just slightly. Here's where it's set. I'm not a professional, but I hope this will be a good setting for the gas. And on here I've got it at 3.5 and E.5. That's the recommended setting inside the panel here if you're welding a 14 gauge metal. So now I'm just going to go around and put a tack over here, one over there, and just do this all around the whole frame. I'm just going to crank up the heat a little bit. So here's an idea of the tack welds I'm talking about. I'm going to do this all around. So I've done 3 corners. I haven't done this corner over here, but I'm going to take off some of the clamps and a magnet over here just to see where I'm at. Alright, I'm happy so far. I just wanted to make sure everything was aligning, so all I have to do is tack weld the last joint over there. Alright, so I got that done. I'm going to take the clamp off. I'm going to flip it over and then tack weld the corners on this side. So here's a close look at all the tack welds. I found I was getting the hang of it when I was almost done. Now with the tack welds on, what I need to do now is to weld a full bead on all the joints. Now with the tack welds on both sides of the frame, it's going to prevent the metal from warping, because when you weld a full bead, the metal will tend to bend the opposite way, so the tacks will prevent that. Now at this point I've got the welder set at 5 and G, and in the welder panel here I realized that the setting for 12 gauge metal works a lot better. So 5 and G, that's if you're using an 025 wire with the argon and CO2. Now I'm ready to weld a full bead on this corner. And here's how the weld turned out. And now I'll just repeat the process on all 3 corners. So here are my welds. This weld here, I had a bit of a hard time with it. I think I had the heat up too high. I melted a small hole, so I had to go back and fill it. And by the time I got to the 2 last ones over here, I think I had the welder set up much better than in the beginning in regards to wire feed and the heat setting. So now I'll just flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Alright, now I've got all the welds done on this side. Now what I'm going to do is weld on the inside of each corner. And to do this, I'm going to stand it upright because I want to weld at a horizontal level. And here's my weld on this corner. Now I just have to repeat the same process on all 3 other corners. And another tip when you're welding, make sure you've got good ventilation in your shop. Alright, now that you've got the inside beads done, you want to go and weld the outside corners. And I've already grinded the edges here with a flap disc on an angle grinder. So now I'm ready to fill that in with a solid bead. And here's the first bead. I had to stop part ways here because I got sparks that went on my pants. So I've got it all welded up. What I'm going to do is let it cool down, then I'm going to grab my angle grinder with the flap disc and grind down the welds a bit. Okay, I've got an 80 grit flap disc on my grinder. It's a brand new one. The reason why I'm grinding them down is just to make it look better. I'm not going to grind down the weld too much because I don't want to damage the strength of it. So I'm just going to go around, do it to all the welds, and when I'm happy with it, I'll just leave it the way it is. And this is the look that I'm after. Now I'm just going to do this to all 3 other corners, and I'm going to go outside to do this so I don't have all the sparks inside my garage. Alright, I've got it all grinded down. This is what the end product will be. So there's still a lot of weld holding that, even though a lot of it got grinded off. And the beads on the inside corners, I didn't touch them at all. They're just going to stay the way they are. At this stage in the construction of your welding cart, you're going to need to cut a piece of square tubing that is 27 inches and a half. Just like you see here, it's cut flat at one end, and at the other end, it's cut at a 45-degree angle. So it's 27 and a half from the top here, straight to the bottom. The stick welder is going to be at the bottom here, the MIG welder at the top. So this is the platform for the MIG that we're building now. And by the way, you're going to need 2 pieces like this. And here's the next piece. This will be the platform. And you're also going to need 2 of these, and they are 20 inches in length. And at one end it's cut at a 45-degree angle, and the other end is flat. So starting from the end here where the miter cut is, right to the other end of the bar where it's flat, it's 20 inches. Now the square tubing here is placed at 7 inches 3/4 from the end over here. And once you've got it placed at the right spot, it's good to secure it with a C-clamp. And I'm using a 4-inch clamp today for this. You want to just be careful when you tighten up the clamp that you keep it exactly where it's supposed to go. And once you've got the clamp on, just measure it again. This will just make sure that everything's exact. And I've got the square tubing flush with the other piece right to the bottom. And now what I'm going to do is put a few tack welds in this corner here and then over here. And now you can take the clamp off. Okay, now I'm going to get ready to put full beads on both sides. And then I'm also going to run a bead all along here. I've realized it might be easier to just weld it on its side like this. And I'll run the bead across on the top. Okay, so I got this pipe on. Now I need to repeat the same process on this side. And again, the measurements between the square tubing and then over here is 7 3/4 inches, and just make sure you do the same thing over here. So what I've done on this side is I marked it with a marker. And another very important thing, you want to make sure that the square tubing is plumb. Also make sure that your table is nice and level so you get an accurate reading. And always do this before you tack weld the square tubing on. And at this point it's pretty accurate, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And now I'm going to tack weld it and repeat the process that I did on the other side over there. Alright, I've got both pieces of square tubing welded onto the frame. I also added a few tack welds underneath and used the flap disc to grind them down like that. So now the next pieces to weld on are these. So I've got the top bar welded on. As you can see, I used some miter clamps over here just to keep it nice and straight. And then I tacked both sides of the tubing. And then you want to make sure that the bar is level. And it is over here. So now I'll just remove the miter clamps and fill in the cracks here with some full beads. And before I put the pipes together, I did grind off just a bit of an angle here inside the square tubing, just like I did with the other parts over here. And you can also grind off a bit here with the flap disc as well, so you can fill in a nice bead in the crack over here. I put it on the floor here so it's easier to work on. Also, before you put in the final welds, you want to make sure that it's nice and straight this way. It's really important before you fill it in. And now at this point, I'm going to weld on the second bar on the top here. Now when you add the second square tubing on top, make sure that it's level with the other tubing over here. So you may have to slightly adjust it just to get it perfect. And you want to make sure that the width back here, which is 8 3/4, will be the same at the front of the tubing over here. You can always move it in slightly and hold it when you're tacking it just to keep it in the desired place. So again, just make sure everything is even. And this is what I have now. All the tacks are there. The clamp can come off now. And my measurements are still good and it's nice and level. So at this point here I can move on to fill in the cracks here with full beads. What I've done here is I took a piece of wood, I cut it the same width as in between the two square tubes here, then I clamped it over here. That's to prevent the metal from moving when I put in the full welds here on the square tubing. Sometimes when you weld stuff, sometimes it tends to move a bit, so I'm hoping this will keep everything nice and straight. Okay, I've got that all welded up. Now I'm going to take off the clamp. Always make sure to have proper ventilation in your shop when you're welding. Keep the doors open. And I'm happy with this so far, and I'm just going to use my angle grinder with the flap disc and grind down the welds so they look nice. Alright, I just grinded down the welds with my flap disc here, and this is what I came out with. Again, you don't have to do this, but on the top here it's good to do it because you want everything to be flush, but on the side it's only for cosmetic purposes only. So do what you want with that. Don't grind down too much of the weld because you could weaken the joint. And here's an overview of where I'm at now. Got the whole frame done pretty well.